Who doesn't love a good pack-in game for a new video game console? It used to be an industry standard for console manufacturers to sell them alongside a recommended game, and some of the most famous, most respected games in history have risen to prominence as the face of their respective consoles. The original Super Mario Bros., Alex Kidd, Sonic the Hedgehog, Super Mario World, Virtua Fighter. Sony themselves disrupted this process, offering instead demo discs to showcase the range and variety of their consoles. From the Nintendo 64 onwards, the industry standard seemed to be to sell consoles alone and let retailers find bundle combinations to upsell on their own. However, Wii Sports did disrupt things by making the use of the Wii Remote's motion controls apparent to everyone. Whereas previous packing games had been designed to show off the power and the spirit of the console, this was a special case that also served to introduce a whole new method of play. 26 years after that original PlayStation launch, when the PlayStation 5 finally rolled around, Sony turned back the clock and they offered Astros Playroom as a pre-installed free game on all PS5 consoles. Given how hard it was to get hold of the console in that launch window, it took many players many months to get hold of this game. But as they did, comparisons with Nintendo began to become commonplace. Astro's Playroom is a short experience designed to upsell the haptic feedback and motion control capabilities on the DualSense controller. Of course, comparisons with Wii Sports would abound. However, haptic feedback is a fiddly thing that can be difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't felt it. And whilst I do see the overlap with Wii Sports, that was a small collection of 4 set experiences, not a fully fleshed out adventure game. Astro's Playroom is a third-person platformer. Honestly, it shares more in common with Super Mario 64 than Wii Sports. I can see why everyone is reminded of Nintendo, but I think that the people misunderstand why their brains are making that cognitive leap. Given that the whole experience is designed to celebrate 5 generations of PlayStation history, featuring cameos and callbacks to some of the greatest moments available on PlayStation consoles, it's striking to me how the game's very design and construction represent a very Nintendo design philosophy. To explain this, I need to make some generalizations, but I do suppose everyone has a certain amount of cognitive bias. Because the whole time that Sony has been in the video game business, they have been just one of several companies building communities around their hardware. The rules of gaming have changed time and time again, with some parties stepping in and out of contention, and although the details change with each passing technological fad with each generation, I've always had certain preconceptions about these publishers and their core values. For example, when the PlayStation 1 launched, the PlayStation competition was for consoles from Sega and Nintendo. Sega is a great company that, before it bowed out of the console race, was famous for fast and flashy titles, high octane and polish, full of replay value, but possibly quite short. A good Sega game is a distinctive game that wears its ambition on its sleeve. It pushes for thrills and excitement, but often the downside is many of the titles there don't have much length or depth. Not every title from Sega is like this, but the stereotypical one would be. Sony, however, value big budget variety experiences. This can be seen from their original choice to put a demo disc in with the console rather than specify a single specific game. A new generation of gamers got to experience the taster snippets with fragments of games of Wipeout, Tekken, Ridge Racer, Crash Bandicoot, Gran Turismo and many more, alongside video trailers for even more games besides. Sony were flexible. They provided a grand buffet of games, a little bit of everything, all extremely proficient, well made and carefully balanced for a broad audience. But with my biased Sega hat on, they contain perhaps a little less soul than their competitors. Later, as Sega bowed out of the race, Microsoft appeared as the next competitor. From the start, Microsoft has focused on digital connectivity. Their games are open and accessible to everyone. It's a design ethos that has evolved through the generations, with Microsoft fighting to maintain dominance for the online space. Microsoft has no need for bundled games or demo discs. They want to sell the online experience, which now brings a full catalogue of titles to pick and choose on their subscription service. And Nintendo, always the black sheep doing its own thing, arrogantly self-assured, overconfident with their own prowess. Nintendo's focus has always been on individual game mechanics. Every game, be it from the N64, GameCube, through the Wagglefest Wii years, dual screen DS, 3DS and Wii U consoles, and then the portable Switch, has been built around game mechanics. Nintendo like to get into the fundamental design principles of the way you control their character, the very way that you interact with the world around you, and then they build their games around these new concepts. Better game analysts than me have waxed lyrical about the way games like Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze build levels around introducing mechanics one at a time, extrapolating and building conceptually as they ramp up the difficulty. It's not something that's unique to Nintendo. They can't patent that concept. But through both the Super Mario Bros. And Donkey Kong Country series, this has been the pattern every game has built upon. People complain that Nintendo keeps remaking the same game, relying on the same set of franchises through each new iteration of hardware. But this is to grossly misunderstand what Nintendo are. Nintendo have an archetype, a framework of comfortable storytelling, a familiar dream world to stage these games. However, when they construct a new game, they rebuild them from brand new mechanical concepts, building gameplay loops, level designs, and sometimes even control schemes around those new ideas. From one perspective, whilst Sony and Microsoft have taken broadly established concepts in gaming and refined them to perfection, bringing them to wider audiences, Nintendo have been self-obsessed with trying to reinvent the wheel. On the other hand, whilst the former two have been trapped in the same game genres, broadly only able to innovate with more powerful graphic engines and narrative integration, Nintendo have been a hub of creativity and design. Every Nintendo console since the Wii has launched with a standout controller-focused game. Wii Sports, which was actually packed in with the console, introduced players to the waggle controls, and whatever else people think about that console, launching the game alongside the hardware was one of the best decisions Nintendo ever made. Then, a lot of people get angsty about the Wii U's struggle to launch, but Nintendo Land itself was not the problem. It had such a great premise, and it really was a fascinating multiplayer game. If only Nintendo had packaged it with the console, and if they'd then bought into the online connectivity, if they'd planned for future DLC updates to add new minigames to Nintendo Land, this could have been something special. Even with the Switch, whilst most would point at Breath of the Wild as the de facto launch game, there's plenty of evidence that Nintendo's own team strongly believed that 1-2 Switch was the centrepiece of their new console. However, whilst the new hardware is always something fun for people to rush up and experiment with, keen to experience the novelty of something flashy and new, the returns for Nintendo have been lesser and lesser with each instance because they're failing at the one thing that they're normally brilliant at. You need more than just a concept for new player controls. You need to take that concept and build a full game around it, not just a small selection of player experiences. With the PS5, Sony didn't just have more powerful graphics, though I'm sure the potential for a 4K 60fps target to now be in reach is welcome. They had two big innovations. One was the SSD for lightning fast loading, and the next was the haptic feedback on their new controller. And though Team Asobi, a comparatively small arm of the international studio's broader workforce, were tasked with showcasing the hardware, their true innovation was building gameplay loops that would introduce and then successively build upon these new gameplay mechanics one at a time. The adventure of Astros Playroom crosses 4 courses where each has 2 platforming segments and 2 motion control segments. Each course iterates on a few select mechanics, such as Astro transforms into a ball and you have to navigate him through increasingly complex courses. First, the challenge is to make your way forwards, then it's to not fall off the bespoke edges, then it's to hit certain targets, then it's to manage to not fall off your edges whilst avoiding the bouncing pads that will launch you in random directions, whilst hitting bespoke targets to unlock the path forward. As these aspects are combined, you're juggling several distinct skills at the same time to progress. For anyone versed in old school platforming gameplay, this is an exquisitely paced selection of levels. It helps that Astrobot is a joy to control, with buttery smooth movement thanks to the ultra responsive controls. Take one hit and he breaks down. However, there are infinite lives, meaning that frustration of the more challenging sections is minimal. Admittedly, he is quite a generic platforming protagonist, but that's almost the point for this game. The focus is not on building a story or a narrative, but providing gameplay experience that allows for callback of Sony's past successes. The touchpad, motion controls and haptic feedback of the DualSense controller are in full display, but it's not their presence, but the smooth integration of them into the adventure that stands out. The problem is the overall length. The routes themselves can be completed in just a couple of hours. Completionists can find a little more depth, finding the missing collectibles hidden throughout the stages to complete a back catalogue of Sony collection, but this honestly won't take you that long. Reviewers, when this game came out, declared proudly that the PS5 had a Nintendo-beating free game tied in, but reading through these reviews, they all trumpet the smooth integration of motion controls. I wouldn't upsell Astros Playroom on those controls. It does contain them, and they're great, but I would upsell it on the fact that it's a damn fine 3D platforming game. It's possibly the finest 3D platforming game with a focus on player control mechanics since Nintendo's own Super Mario Odyssey that was released 3 years earlier. And for me at least, whilst I applaud Nintendo for taking risks, it's been some time since the motion innovations and adventure gameplay have meshed nearly as seamlessly as this. The company often seems to be split between its hardcore and casual audiences, and it struggles to hold them both together. Astros Playroom has no such issue. Its aesthetics are childish and vibrant, but don't be fooled. This is a short but full-fledged platforming adventure with a brilliant reward for anyone who completes the full courses. A modern-day reimagining of the original PSX demo disc that announced the company's entrance to the video gaming community. Astros Playroom put Team Asobi on the map, meaning that a year later the entire Japan Studios was reorganised to make them a standalone studio who would publish under the PlayStation Studios branding in their own right. For a team that began by developing augmented reality minigames, generally well reviewed but contained in a niche audience interested in augmented or virtual reality. But the benefits of technologies shouldn't be kept behind locked doors. The better innovations should be open to everyone.